There's been a lot of talk about the uncommitted vote in Michigan on Tuesday's primary. And before the vote, there were reports that the Biden administration was, quote, freaking out about it. But I mean, after 101,000 people voted uncommitted, we've all been pretty curious to hear what they think now, because if they were freaking out before the vote, they've got to be freaking out now. And we finally got a response. And it is genuinely astonishing that this is their response to disillusioned voters in Michigan. So campaign co-chair for Biden's 2024 campaign, Mitch Landrieu, says, quote, "We are going to continue to talk to them and then ask them to think about the choices and what the consequences are about electing somebody who wants to have a Muslim ban." In other words, you have no choice but to support Biden in November because you have nowhere else to go. You're not going to support Trump. We know that. So it's either genocide with Biden or genocide and a Muslim ban with Trump. So shut the fuck up and accept your choices. Amazing. First of all, saying vote for us because the other guy is worse, not necessarily the most inspiring message. I take it a lot of people aren't going to be motivated to get out and vote affirmatively for Biden. Maybe they will vote against Trump, but that right there, that's not going to mobilize voters. Second of all, they are basically saying implicitly that they're not going to change course, meaning that they are effectively willing to risk losing this election to Trump, all to continue to appease Netanyahu. It is so stunning. And I think that this hubris hinges on the fact that they think that the backlash to Biden supporting genocide is just contained to Michigan. But if they actually think that, then they are horribly mistaken, because activists in Colorado are organizing an uncommitted vote there too, following the success in Michigan's campaign. And the largest labor union in Washington state has endorsed an uncommitted campaign against Biden there as well. But, you know, I'm sure that they don't care because, well, Trump's worse, so shut the fuck up and accept my support for genocide or get a Muslim ban too. Now, listen to Michigan responded, and this is what they said, quote, "It's deeply offensive that President Biden keeps suggesting he has a messaging issue among Arab Americans and young people rather than a funding bombs issue. Biden's reelection chances will be judged by how much of Gaza is left standing by November. It is our hope that Biden chooses the people of America over sending Netanyahu a blank check for war and occupation." Yeah, well, I'm not holding my breath. Now, remember that ceasefire that he said that he was trying to broker when he was in an ice cream shop before the vote took place? Well, he's already throwing cold water on that. And it is specifically because the government he's supporting committed what people are now calling the flower massacre. And in response, he says that that's going to complicate negotiations, which is to be expected. But the fact that they did this flower massacre should be a turning point, you would think. There's been many points where you think, man, maybe this should be a turning point for the Biden administration, bombing hospitals and schools and residential areas and cultural centers. So don't think that the flower massacre is really going to have an impact on him and sway him at all. But nonetheless, this is a pretty big deal as well. Al Jazeera reports more than 100 Palestinians have been killed and some 700 others wounded after Israeli troops opened fire on hundreds waiting for food aid southwest of Gaza City, health officials say, as the besieged enclave faces an unprecedented hunger crisis. People had congregated at Al Rashid Street, where aid trucks carrying flour were believed to be on the way. Al Jazeera verified footage showing the bodies of dozens of killed and wounded Palestinians being carried onto trucks as no ambulances could reach the area. Quote, "We went to get flour. The Israeli army shot at us. There are many martyrs on the ground, and until this moment, we are withdrawing them. There is no first aid," said one witness. Reporting from the scene, Al Jazeera's Ishmael Al-Ghul said that after opening fire, Israeli tanks advanced and ran over many of the dead and injured bodies. Quote, "It is a massacre on top of the starvation threatening citizens in Gaza," he said. They murdered people who were trying to get flour. Now, in response, the IDF accused the Gazans that they murdered of looting the supplies and subsequently released this footage here. I'm not going to play it for you, but there's a screenshot showing that dozens died from what they call overcrowding and trampling. So just stop for a moment and think about how twisted this response is from the IDF. They were implying that they had no choice but to open fire on them because they were trampling each other.
With the humanist report of the people in the Bernie Sanders industrial complex, to me, more often than not, he has the best analysis using the most harsh language, or harsher language than the rest of the people in part of the Bernie Sanders industrial complex. Because you see the majority report say stuff like, yeah, this is bad, what's going on? But the way he does it, to me, is a little bit gives him the top person in my eyes in the Bernie Sanders industrial complex. So, but what's curious is that he makes this analysis, but I don't want to tip you off. I'm sure some of you can guess. Let's listen to some more of this, and you can put your guess in the comments if you think you know where I'm going. He's saying all of this is this great analysis. And this is I'm finding the social democrat is beginning to do this more often, where they're willing to go further in the critique of the Biden administration, but they still have the same remedy, which is vote blue because of Trump. So I'm sorry, I guess I tipped it off. So let's listen to a little more in this great analysis, and then I'll get into my monologue.
People, they had to kill people, specifically more than 100 people. Makes total sense. These are the types of genocidal freaks that we're dealing with here. Now, they also accuse them of looting while pretending as if they're not also deliberately starving Palestinians who have been forced to eat grass and drink polluted water just to survive. So, I mean, when one aid truck finally is allowed in by Israel, yeah, they were a little bit desperate, and they crowded the aid truck as any human being who was starving to death would do.
This is literally something Western countries simply can't grasp. Like the average person in the country can't grasp the feeling of such hunger that when you see an aid truck, not with like shrimps and steaks on it, but just flour and other smaller items, you run to it and begin wanting to eat it directly from off the truck. It is something that Western countries simply cannot fathom, that level of hunger. Just simply can't. So for me, I push back. Let's put it that way. I push back when we get to the description of people who are starving, rushing a truck where they think is food. I would not. I push back on descriptions like insane, crazy, like any sort of negative connotation. It's a little bit soft language he's using here that I would not use. I would be a little bit more forceful and saying, "What the fuck you expect?" And I kind of think he's sort of said something like that, so I will give him that credit.
But to put things into perspective, I want to play a clip from Melanie Ward of the organization called Medical Aid for Palestinians, because what she says here about what's happening.
Now, another reason I chose this clip is because two of the receipts that I was going to use separately in this segment, he puts in his video. So I'm like, oh, okay, so I can do it all in one. So, and this next one is the second receipt that I speak of, this video that he
Is chilling.
Let's explain first to our viewers why aid isn't being allowed in. Where is the aid?
It's very simple. It's because the Israeli military won't let it in. We could end this starvation tomorrow very simply if they would just let us have access to people there, but it's not being allowed. This is what they said on the 7th of October. Nothing will go in, and so it remains the case. And for people in the north of Gaza,
I think what she's describing in the video and what we already know, how they're starving the people there, this is the point. So this jousting back with Biden and we got to slow down, this is just a dance. The point is to trim the Palestinian population by death, by displacement, whatever, by any means necessary. This is the point. Like let's go back and convince and this and no, this is the point. Because at the end of this, what are they going to be able to say? Oh, we've killed, because once they start to count the missing, we killed upwards of 75,000 Palestinians, half or more than half of which is women and children, the people who will give birth to a new nation. And we've displaced millions. That's the point. So whether starving, and I believe it was Bernie Sanders who said that, I forget who he referenced, so I would just reference Bernie Sanders, saying that some organization, he said that it's likely that the deaths from starvation will supersede the deaths from all the bombings. So keep that in mind. I'm going to rewind it back just a little bit. This is one of the videos I had separately to play, but he has it here, so which is great. So let's rewind it to the beginning.
Why aid isn't being allowed in? Where is the aid?
It's very simple. It's because the Israeli military won't let it in. We could end this starvation tomorrow very simply if they would just let us have access to people there, but it's not being allowed. This is what they said on the 7th of October. Nothing will go in, and so it remains the case. And for people in the north of Gaza, it's even worse because no food is reaching them anymore. And so my own staff, my own colleague Abir, has been eating animal feed, and horrifyingly, the food that they were eating, which is food for horse and donkeys, is now running out, and now they're eating birdseed. The statistics also tell their own story. 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 in the north of Gaza are now acutely malnourished. This is the fastest decline in a population nutrition status ever recorded. And what that means is that children are being starved at the fastest rate the world has ever seen.
Did you hear that? We already knew the UN, I believe it was, already stated that something along the lines of the kill rate here, civilian kill rate, is something they've never seen. The child death rate is something they've never seen. You hear here that the starvation rate is something they've never seen before. But the United States is still voting in the UN against the ceasefire. The United States knows that the Israeli government is preventing food and medicine from getting in, and supplies from getting into Gaza. The government knows that. But they swallow their tongue when it comes to describing, using any adjectives to describe what Israel's doing. But Alexei Navalny dies, and in 2 seconds, Putin did it by this way. This is a war crime in 2 seconds. Anything with Putin in 2 seconds. No evidence. This came from the president, who said that Putin killed Navalny. Anyway, let's get through some more of this video.
And we could finish it tomorrow. We could save them all, but we're not being able to.
We're witnessing the fastest decline in a population's nutrition status ever recorded.
That's crazy.
Again, all of this is purposeful. Israel is choosing to starve Gazans. It is all deliberate. And as they allow aid to trickle in, they then open fire on the population when it gets a little bit too rowdy, as they starve to death because of Israel. It's just so sickening. And as this war goes on, with how many atrocities that we've seen that are just beyond the pale and indescribable, I don't even know what else to say. The fact that it's gone on this long, it makes me lose hope for humanity, that we can all collectively sit back and watch this happen, and there's nothing we can do. It's genuinely despicable and nauseating. Now, Congressman Ro Khanna questioned Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin about Israel's refusal to let aid in, and he asked if there's going to be any consequence at all for all the war crimes they're committing, perhaps maybe cutting off weapons at a minimum. I know, difficult to hear that possibility because we've got to keep giving them weapons to kill innocent Palestinians. But as you're going to see, Lloyd Austin had no good response because there won't be any consequences.
Now, let's stop here before we get to Ro Khanna, because this next thing that Ro Khanna does, this is the part where progressives have built out the space to say, You see, this is how we're different from the regular Democrats, us progressive Democrats. We say words during hearings so that people can put it on video. We do that. Yeah. We support financially the state of Israel the same. Let's continue. I could say more, but I want to try to keep this going here.
Let's watch.
Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Program, has said that the Palestinian children are starving. Extremist settler Stomrich, Israel's finance minister, stopped American flour, which our taxpayers paid for to get into Gaza. If Israel again ever stops American-paid aid from getting into Gaza, will you commit to not sending future arms sales?
So you're committing to not selling future arms sales. Listen to what the Social Democrats is saying here. You're committing to not sending future arms sales if they prevent food from getting in and killing people. You see where the Social Democrat feels okay with challenging power? Because why wouldn't the question be, once we hit 5,000 civilians killed, we should have stopped supplying them with weapons? That is the mark. Deaths. What the weapons actually do. What the Social Democrat picks is starvation for weapons. And you notice the source he used is deceased or late Senator John McCain's wife. She runs, this rich lady runs this. Oh God, this is how they able to say that I did something in my life. These rich people, they do stuff like this. They run these organizations, but she's running an actual organization. That's why he feels comfortable in this setting to use it, those numbers. Anyway, let's continue on and let Rokana, I'm sure he probably tweeted this out right here.
Again, that's not my decision. I would number one, do what I've been doing and engage the leadership and encourage them to ensure that humanitarian assistance is getting.
Mr. Secretary, I would just say, and one more question, that we need some consequences when another country is defying you, defying the National Security Advisor, defying the president, defying National Security Memorandum 20. There has to be some consequence. And then I was surprised John Kirby said that Israel is taking more precautions.
You see where the Social Democrat feels comfortable? The critique is a backhanded compliment to Lloyd Austin. It's Israel is not doing what you said, Lloyd. You believe this? Instead of saying Israel is killing people at an enormous rate and babies. Because it can't be about the Palestinian lives. It has to be about something he feels comfortable in the space, in this space. So weak. But let me let it finish out.
Than the U.S. military would to protect civilian life. Mr. Austin, Secretary Austin, isn't that statement inaccurate given Israel has used hundreds of 22,000-pound dumb bombs when there were no place for civilians to go? Would the U.S. government ever target terrorists with 2,000-pound bombs in a densely populated area?
Well, it depends on the situation, and again.
But have we done that? Use 45% of bombs that are unguided or a 2,000-pound bomb? I mean, do you really think that the Israeli government military is taking more precautions than the United States military would?
I think just based upon the results in terms of the significant loss of life.
Gentleman's time's expired, Chair. And I
Now, he was also asked about whether or not weapons to Israel would be cut off since they're using them to commit war crimes, and knowingly giving weapons to a state that is using them to commit war crimes is a violation of international law. And of course, Lloyd Austin didn't give a direct answer to that, even though at the start of that exchange, he admitted that Israel has killed more than 25,000 innocent civilians. But it doesn't matter. Going to keep funding them, going to keep on vetoing ceasefire resolutions on the UN Security Council. It doesn't matter. And they are pretending as if they're oblivious to everything that's going on. They're acting as if they don't have access to the same information that we all have, right? When in actuality, they know more than us. They have more intelligence of us.
Yeah.
So if anything, they know how much worse it is on the ground, but yet not going to make any changes. And to make matters even worse, it seems like a ground invasion of Rafah is now imminent, even though the Biden administration has tried to discourage Israel from doing this. But of course,
So keep that in mind. They're not going to make any changes with all the protests they've seen, with the polls they've seen, with their own constituency supporting this ceasefire up until like 79 percentile or something like that. And they're still not going to do it. And they're not going to do anything about it either, meaning they're not going to go ahead. They're going to just continue to vote for him. But let's listen.
Israel isn't listening because they know that they can do whatever they want, and the Biden administration is still going to continue to support them. And to make matters even worse, the Biden administration is now expressing concerns that a ground invasion of Lebanon is possible. And yet, I still don't hear any possible change in policy towards Israel. This is a rogue state that needs to be sanctioned and cut off from the international community entirely. But we can't even get the U.S. government to agree to stop sending them more weapons that they're using against innocent civilians. What the fuck? It's just so frustrating to see them play dumb and to tell us to shut the fuck up when we criticize Biden over this. If you are somebody who is trying to scold anyone for speaking out against this, shame on you. If you're a Biden supporter, you can vote for him because we all acknowledge that Trump is worse. But
What? What? We are at, now I know it's long and it took a long time to get here. We're in the 11th minute of the video. So the first 11 minutes and 30 seconds, the video was saying something positive, was destroying him. Thank you, sweetheart. Was destroying Joe Biden. The first 11 minutes, and then he casually slips in, oh, yeah, I know we're going to vote blue anyway. After just saying you're so frustrated, they're not listening, all this stuff. Why would they change, the Democrats that is, in this case, Joe Biden, why would he change when he hears what you do that, Michael? Why would he make a change, for example? It is bizarre, but if you did hear it, I'm going to rewind it and then let him finish the statement that he was making. But then this is the point that where I wanted to end it on. So we're not going to listen to the rest, but I'll let him finish his statement.
frustrating to see them play dumb and to tell us to shut the fuck up when we criticize Biden over this. If you are somebody who is trying to scold anyone for speaking out against this, shame on you. If you're a Biden supporter, you can vote for him because we all acknowledge that Trump is worse. But if you tell people, don't you dare criticize him, you really need to look in the mirror because maybe you're in a cult.
You need to look in the mirror if you get mad at somebody scolding Biden. Not if you get mad if somebody votes for him who's supporting a genocide. This is just insane, but it's so insane. I got to hear that again. Sorry, guys.
To see them play dumb and to tell us to shut the fuck up when we criticize Biden over this. If you are somebody who is trying to scold anyone for speaking out against this, shame on you. If you're a Biden supporter, you can vote for him because we all acknowledge that Trump is worse. But if you tell people, don't you dare criticize him, you really need to look in the mirror, because maybe you're in a cult.
He really is saying this. If you're a Biden supporter, you can vote for the guy who's supporting a genocide and all the description you just gave in the first 11 and a half minutes. But if said Biden supporter or voter decides to scold someone else for critiquing Biden on this issue, shame on you, and you should look in the mirror. That is serious. He's serious. I gotta play some more of this because I'm in shock. I did not get this far. I maybe got to the 8-minute mark.
Us to shut the fuck up when we criticize Biden over this. If you are somebody who is trying to scold anyone for speaking out against this, shame on you. If you're a Biden supporter, you can vote for him, because we all acknowledge that Trump is worse. But if you tell people, don't you dare criticize him, you really need to look in the mirror, because maybe you're in a cult just like MAGA supporters. But, you know, apparently you have to let Biden continue to use our tax dollars in perpetuity to support this. Otherwise, you clearly haven't thought through the consequences of
What? What is he talking about? We're gonna move on here. What? Anyway, you're voting for him? Aren't you contributing? Aren't you being complicit? It is the mental gymnastics here. It is astonishing to me. This latest massacre, dubbed the Flower Massacre, if this is what our democracy cozies up with, if this is what our democracy refuses to label a genocide, if this is what our democracy will swallow their tongue about when Israel prevents humanitarian trucks from getting to starving kids, why are we trying to save this democracy for what? That's the question that is posed for this segment. But this is the headline from the Associated Press. Gaza doctors say gunfire accounted for 80% of the wounds at his hospital from aid convoy bloodshed. So from the trucks that came in and the shootings and the massacre that happened, the Flower Massacre, 80% of the wounds are from gunshot wounds. Because we're going to get to the video. Israel tried to spin this as, oh no, this is a stampede. And there were a few people shot. Not according to the people at the hospital. Not according to them. But let's listen to this first video. Hang on a second here. Yeah. This first video, this is from Abby Phillips. I forget, what's the name of her show? Is it listed here? I forget the name of her show. Maybe it'll show it, but this is just showing just the details of the massacre. So let's get a little bit of grounding for the conversation. Details of the massacre. There is no, we're not going to see any dismembered people or anything like that, but you might see somebody bloody or something like that. So if you don't want to see that, look away for the next several minutes here.
What is it like to watch chaos unfold at your feet, unable to stop it, unable to do anything but watch? Well, tonight, the world knows. This is video from the Israeli Defense Forces, and that swarm, that buzzing nucleus, those are people, desperate Gazans surrounding aid trucks who are carrying food and supplies. Now, this hour, 112 of those people are now dead. Hundreds more are injured as cameras caught a clear-eyed view of what this war is doing to innocents inside of Gaza. All of what you're about to watch is disturbing and it's shocking, and we thought long and hard about whether to show this to you. But the brutality of what happened is inescapable. This was the scene that was surrounding that aid convoy before the disaster intervened. Palestinians huddled, their chatter, you could hear it there over the din of the fires that they had set to keep warm as they waited. They just wanted to eat, they wanted to feed their kids and their parents. The World Food Program was last able to deliver aid to North Gaza more than...
Now, is that Hamas in there? Is that Hamas huddled around the fire? Or is that some kids? And our government supports this and looks the other way and refuses to describe what's happening over here in Gaza. Over there in Gaza, I should say.
Kids and their parents. The World Food Program was last able to deliver aid to North Gaza more than a month ago. Now, after a month without food and months scrambling for just the tiniest morsels, this convoy, 30 trucks in all, offered a rare glimmer of hope in the pitch black darkness that is now life for Palestinians in Gaza. But hope is, of course, the most fragile of things, and soon the bullets shattered it. That crackle of IDF gunfire came around 4 o'clock in the morning. The bursts killed 20 people, and according to local journalists who were on the scene, that triggered a chain reaction, a deadly stampede of people running from danger, only to stumble into even more. Some were trampled, some were run over by the trucks themselves. Now, daylight brought clarity on the catastrophe, the painful and unnerving clarity of it all. Men used donkeys to cart away corpses. From the pictures, it's hard to discern who died from Israeli gunfire and who died by stampede.
So, John Kirby, Lloyd Austin, the other two clowns over at the State Department, they look at it, this picture, and they go, I'm not sure what that is there. I'm not sure if this is a tragedy or not. There's video evidence. If we can make a determination of what happened, why can't the government from the same evidence? But anytime these things happen, things like this happen, the coverage that is right when it's breaking is the most honest coverage. They haven't thought out their establishment talking point. That is always the coverage that is the most honest. It's still not 100% honest. But for example, they reporting on it real time or breaking before you interview an Israeli official and you start to get their story that no, the stampede happened first. You see how she's reporting it the right way. What happened? The crackling of the gunfire, which started people running in the trucks. So this is the honest coverage. But if you go and turn to it now, it's not, they're not saying it this way anymore. So, but let's listen to some more.
When donkeys weren't an option, bystanders loaded the bodies onto pallets. They dragged them, carrying them. Men were suddenly turned into pallbearers. Inside of Gaza City, near its already hollowed out hospitals, the scale of this slaughter gets even more obvious. The floor is now a triage table. And for others, they arrived simply beyond saving.
Just because of YouTube, the stuff with the bodies and stuff, I'm going to fast forward through. If the stream has a lot of critique of the empire, like stuff that is not a normal critique, even heard in left spaces, they'll take that shit down. And us calling that segment the legend of Aaron Bushnell, they removed that video specifically because of that. But anyway, because the video we played of his was the blurred version. So it didn't show anything. It just showed him walk up and then everything went blurred. So you couldn't see anything else. So it wasn't that. They used something else, technicality to take that down. But anyway, I fast forward through some of the graphic stuff. Let's finish what she's saying here.
Without question, what happened here is a stain on humanity. This is how Israel has described what happened in that crowd.
The trucks went through, they were surrounded by hundreds of people, thousands of people perhaps, and as they were trying to loot the goods on the trucks, it appears that the trucks continued to move forward. And this is the unfortunate reality, a mass.
So starving people, the verb that is chosen is loot. The trucks are bringing the supplies to these very starving people, but the word he uses is loot.
Casualty event that actually has very little or nothing to do with Israel.
Nothing to do with Israel. Unfortunate is what the Israeli government says. But you can't disconnect this war, first, of course, sparked by an act of brutality from Hamas, from the widespread famine that is currently occurring inside of Gaza, where people, children, are simply wasting away.
Our children die of hunger. They went to get a bag of flour in order to feed their children. Some were run over, others were shot.
And now, Palestinians don't even want the help. They say they would rather starve if it means watching their children die is the cost of eating.
These individuals were not injured in war. Rather, they were harmed while trying to provide for their families. The situation is surreal and chaotic. If aid is to come to us this way, we don't want it. We don't want to live on the blood of our children.
Again, as a reminder, Palestinians have lived through 145 days of near nonstop death. They've now had to watch more people die.
That's just since October 8th. They have lived through decades of nonstop death, actually.
The only question tonight is this a tipping point? Or will this get lost in the fog of war? It's just another day, another unfortunate series of events that ended with death and without change.
So she brings on Medhi Hasan. And that is actually the next video. Same segment on their show, I believe. Yeah, she's wearing the same thing. Yeah. So she said a couple of more words there, and then she turned to Medhi Hasan. Here is that discussion. Let's listen to Medhi. He's on a sort of a tour for his new media company or something like that. You're here.
Joining me now, Medhi Hasan. He's the founder of Zato News. It launches on Substack next month, and his book, Win Every Argument, is also out now on paperback. Medhi, thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to see you. Look, Israel, as we just laid out in the last few hours, have tried to frame this as a tragedy, but just not one that is their fault. The IDF says it fired warning shots to try to disperse the crowd around that convoy. Do you lend any credibility to that explanation? And from the eyes of the world, does it matter what the explanation is for what we saw unfold?
Well, Abby, thanks so much for having me on the show, and thank you for that very important, very powerful intro you did just there. In terms of believing the Israelis, I would say that it took multiple innocent black people to die at the hands of police in this country, whether it's Breonna Taylor, whether it's Freddie Gray, whether
It is quite telling how often.
What is it like to watch chaos unfold at your feet, unable to stop it, unable to do anything but watch? Well, tonight, the world knows. This is video from
the other video is playing.
The Israeli
this video is playing. How is that even
Defense
possible
Forces?
That there are two videos playing? That is astonishing. But let's go back. But yeah, that was the other video playing. I guess you guys heard it too. Anyway, lost my train of thought. Back
joining
to the
me
video.
now, Medhi Hasan. He's the founder of Zato News. It launches on Substack next month, and his book, Win Every Argument, is also out now on paperback. Medhi, thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to see you. Look, Israel, as we just laid out in the last few hours, have tried to frame this as a tragedy, but just not one that is their fault. The IDF says it fired warning shots to try to disperse the crowd around that convoy. Do you lend any credibility to that explanation? And from the eyes of the world, does it matter what the explanation is for what we saw unfold?
And what I was going to say is just like what he does here, using Black struggle and or Black pain to illustrate something, it is very telling how often that is done, which is an indication to me that a lot of people know exactly what's happening, but just like with the Palestinians, they're not willing to go further than an acknowledgement that that's terrible. There's nothing further than that. It's such an American sort of thing to not do anything about an issue. Let's continue.
Well, Abby, thanks so much for having me on the show, and thank you for that very important, very powerful intro you did just there. In terms of believing the Israelis, I would say that it took multiple innocent Black people to die at the hands of police in this country, whether it's Breonna Taylor, whether it's Freddie Gray, whether it's George Floyd, for people in our industry, Abby, to start saying, well, maybe we shouldn't just blindly believe police statements after shootings happen. And I feel like we still haven't quite reached that point in the Middle East with the Israeli military. The Israeli military tend to say things that turn out not to be true, both before Gaza, when they killed Shireen Abu Akleh, a US citizen, and lied about it, or during this conflict. So many lies the Israeli military has told about, you know, a terrorist guard list under the Rantisi hospital, a command and control center under the Al-Shifa hospital, a documentary in Lebanon that they claimed was Palestinians faking their own wounds. So many you can't even count. And now we are told today, well, actually, it was just a stampede, even though eyewitnesses, Abby, say that the Israelis opened fire. Israeli tanks opened fire without warning, according to one eyewitness in the Washington Post. Doctors say that the bodies they got at the hospital, you showed the pictures of people on donkeys, were mostly bullet wounds, not stampede wounds. The Israelis opened fire on hungry people trying to get flour. It's being called a flour massacre for that reason. And you asked, is it a tipping point? I mean, in any normal world, it should be. In any other conflict, it would be, Abby. When Putin did stuff like this in Ukraine, we condemned him. When Assad did stuff like this in Syria, we condemned him. When Israel starves hundreds of thousands of people and then shoots people who go to get flour, where's the condemnation for the United States government? The State Department spokesman would not condemn Israel today. So it's a tragedy. Is it a tipping point? I wish it was. I suspect it isn't.
What President Biden has said is that he has acknowledged the events that happened and says it will likely complicate the negotiations that they've been working on for a temporary ceasefire. From Biden's perspective, do you think this could be the incident that pushes him to actually rethink how he approaches this relationship with this particular Israeli government and this war?
As I argued in a Guardian piece recently, Joe Biden has the power to pick up the phone and end this war. He can ring the Israeli prime minister and say, we're cutting you off. We're cutting off aid. We're cutting off armaments. Israelis themselves, Israeli generals say, we can't do this war without America. He hasn't done it. He didn't do it after 10,000 dead. He didn't do it after 20,000 dead. Today we crossed 30,000 dead. You have to ask the question why. This is a man who's seen as the great comforter in chief, the great empath, has had huge personal tragedy in his own family, and yet 30,000 Palestinians, according to his own defense secretary today, 25,000 women and children. How on earth has he not stopped the war till now? How on earth are we still debating this? And Abby, on the situation on aid, I just got to point out here, 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people in the world are in Gaza right now. Even with or without those aid trucks, people are starving. A 2-month-old baby called Mahmoud Fatou starved to death earlier this week in Gaza. This is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made famine. Food is plentiful. It's available. It's a few miles away, and yet it's being blocked. In fact, at the Israeli crossing, Abby, I don't know how many CNN viewers know that people are putting up bouncy castles, Israeli protesters, and eating popcorn and candy, cotton candy, and blocking the aid. That is crazy.
Do you think, Medhi, that there is... look, I think you understand that you say President Biden can just pick up the phone and cut it all off. You also understand he probably won't do that. So if you were to give him advice today, knowing what he is likely to be able to get to a yes on, what is the one thing that you think he should do today that would make this better?
You see what she's trying to ask? She's saying, without stopping the dead Palestinians from dying, how can we make this better? Because she says, you know, he's not going to change his position. So she is putting him in a very snug corner with this question. Knowing he's not going to change on policy, what can he do to change you? Nothing. Nothing.
Marginally better tomorrow for Gazans.
I mean, simply it is get a ceasefire, and it is within his power to get a ceasefire. It's within the power of the UN Security Council to get a ceasefire. Remember, the rest of the world wants a ceasefire. It's America that has blocked this at the UN Security Council. Even other Western nations have backed a ceasefire. It's Biden blocking it.
So if
he's able to
get if he's able to get that ceasefire that he's been discussing over the weekend, you would view that as progress?
Anything at this point is progress when hundreds of people are being killed every day. But I would point out, you used the right word, marginally better. A new study came out this week that said even if you get a ceasefire tomorrow, 6,500 Palestinians will die in the next 6 months from the public health conditions. And if you don't get a ceasefire tomorrow, 58,000 Palestinians will die over the next 6 months. We will be complicit in that. It's our weaponry, it's our money, it's our diplomatic support, and our president can stop this. And I hope he does.
Real quick,
but I don't think he will.
Before you go, I mean, obviously, you know, this has become a major political issue for the president. Do you think that if it does cost him the presidency, that it should, given his decisions?
Yeah. It should cost him the presidency. And if Donald Trump is going to do the things that all of you describe to this democracy, it should happen to this democracy. I can't think of another reason why a quote unquote democracy, a country, should fall. Can you? I mean, the killing off of an indigenous population, the enslaving of Africans, and genocide, those are all on the same wavelength. That's why Nick says this genocide has completely destroyed the notion of lesser of two evil. How much further can we go than genocide? What is worse than genocide? And that brings me to this video I want to insert here, and because this is about the lesser of two evil and how genocide has destroyed that. Let's let Caitlin Johnstone break it down only the way that she can, and she says it's titled "You Can't Be a Lesser Evil When You're Sponsoring a Genocide."
You can't be a lesser evil when you're sponsoring a genocide. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. You don't get to apply the label lesser evil to a president who is backing a literal genocide. That's not a thing. Past a certain point, you're just plain evil. If you were to make a list of the absolute worst things a powerful leader can do, genocide and carelessness with nuclear brinkmanship should be on the very top of that list. Biden has done both of these. You can't legitimately call such a person a lesser evil. Israel supporters are scum. Lower than them are the Biden supporters who avoid thinking too hard about his genocide in Gaza and make excuses for it, because at least the Israel supporters are honest about what they are. Lower even than the overt Bidenists are the progressives who condemn Israel's actions out of one side of their mouths while still pushing the need to vote for Biden out of the other, because they're even less honest about themselves than the outright shitlibs. If you're going to be a genocide...
So right here, she's critiquing Mike Figueredo from the Humanist Report. Listen.
Honest about themselves than the outright shitlibs. If you're going to be a genocidal shit stain, at least do it without sowing confusion and muddying the waters.
My bad. I didn't go back far enough here. Let me go back a little more.
Need to vote for Biden out of the other, because they're even less honest about themselves than the outright shitlibs. If you're going to be a genocidal shit stain, at least do it without sowing confusion and muddying the waters. So it turns out the New York Times hired an actual genocide supporter who'd never even been a reporter before to co-author atrocity propaganda about mass rapes on October 7th. If the Western media actually told the truth and reported the news, this revelation would be a major international story today. Being an ally country to the USA is like being friends with a really bitchy drama queen, where you're only allowed to help her tear down her social enemies and can't ever talk about what she's doing to create all the conflict in her life, because if you do, she'll come for you next. Palestinian lives are more important than Western feelings. It doesn't matter if criticizing Biden's actions makes your feelings feel nervous about Trump. It doesn't matter if pro-Palestine activism makes your feelings feel like you've been persecuted. Your feelings don't matter. Western liberal leaders are always trying to get you to trade feelings in exchange for concrete improvements in material conditions. Now, Biden administration officials are...
That is spot on. They're always trying to get you to exchange feelings for concrete solutions. You know how they come in and say, our thoughts and prayers. What? No, I need some dividends. Give me, pay me something. But that is such a perfect phrase to describe that.
Proclaiming how disappointed they are in the Netanyahu government for approving thousands of new West Bank settlements, even as they continue their unconditional material support for Israeli butchery of Palestinians. Before that, Western leaders were all babbling about how concerned they are about the impending assault on Rafah, while physically pouring more and more weapons into Israel. Before that, they were telling everyone we should focus on how some Jewish Zionists feel threatened by pro-Palestine demonstrations, instead of focusing on the human butchery that is being experienced by Gazans. You see this over and over again on all issues. You want an end to genocide? They solemnly tell you their hearts are with the people of Gaza who are experiencing unimaginable hardship, but never actually do anything to stop it. You want an end to police brutality? They tell you they hear you, they support you, they stand with you, but never actually change policing.
That's the point we make all the time about social democrats. The party that you are teaming up with will never do what you wanted to do, what you want them to do. They'll just pat you on the head. So when we get to the video on Majority Report, so when you say elect the weaker adversary, elect an adversary that's weaker, because that's their point. That's what they're calling lesser of two evils. Who's weaker? And anyway, I'll give you my points when we get to that video. I'll wait.
Policy. You want health care? They tell you to focus on getting emotionally hysterical about Donald Trump instead of helping to improve your material conditions. You want economic justice? They tell you to instead get worked up about culture war issues the powerful don't care about, and focus on how good it feels to be on the correct side of that war. They've set up this counterfeit currency system where you hand them political power and consent for the murderousness, tyranny, and exploitation of the globe-spanning empire, and they pay you for it with feelings. Here is unipolar planetary hegemony, we tell them, and here are your feelings, they reply magnanimously. Here is our consent for unfettered capitalism, neoliberal imperialist extraction, wars, militarism, starvation sanctions, and proxy conflicts, we say. And as payment for your product, we present you with some feelings, they tell us with a warm smile. Here is our health, the health of our biosphere, our future, and our sanity, we say. And here is a big fat briefcase full of feelings, they reply. The message we are fed over and over again is that feelings matter more than Palestinian lives. Feelings matter more than your neighbors having a roof over their head and being able to provide for their children. Feelings matter more than freedom from tyranny and abuse. Feelings matter more than the ecosystem we depend on for survival. Feelings matter more than avoiding nuclear Armageddon. And everything keeps getting worse and worse. And somehow all these feelings we're being traded aren't actually making us feel any better. Somehow supporting the correct leaders who say the correct words isn't actually improving anything. We've traded these people the entire world and look down to find ourselves holding a big plastic bag of monopoly money.
Always spot on with always spot on with Caitlin Johnstone. That was a perfect breakdown of that. It is about a couple of weeks old. She's done several sort of video articles, audio articles after that on Israel, so you can still check that out. So let's get back to the presentation. There's only about 30 seconds left in this video. Let's finish it up.
On this war.
What I would say is that Joe Biden has rightly said for the last few years that Donald Trump poses an existential threat to our democracy. The idea that he would risk not only his own presidency, but the future of American democracy for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and the rest of the fascists in Israel is bizarre and inexplicable to me.
All right, Medhi Hasan, thank you very much for all of that.
All of that.
Thanks,
she's not making a comment on how his description at all. At all. You're like, I'm not getting into that. Now, what I want to show you here is this is Christian Amanpour. I think that's how you say her name. She brought on Israeli official. When you see him, you'll know exactly he's the buffoon that has been going on a lot, especially in the beginning, right after October 7th. But this is the part where it is, how did I describe it? Israel tells the most ridiculous stories about the Flower Massacre. And this is an example of that. Let's listen.
A crowd was pushing and shoving and people were killed. I can't tell you the exact numbers. I don't, as you know, don't trust the numbers put out by the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. There were reports that maybe the drivers were driving over parts of the crowd. It appears to be a tragedy, but I can tell you Israel was not involved directly in any way.
When you say not involved directly in any way, what do you mean? I mean, you enabled this convoy, as you said, and your forces are there on the ground.
You remember this guy, Mark Regreaves or something like that? He's been made to be proven a fool on TV many times, and then he went away for a while. This is the first interview I've seen of him in a long time, several weeks. So let's listen.
Ground and open fire. They said it themselves. What does that mean, not involved in any way?
So this was, we allowed the aid to come in. We were involved that way. That's our policy, to allow food to go into Gaza for the civilian population. But in the incident of people storming the trucks and the way the truck drivers behaved and people getting squashed and pressed and apparently there being mass casualties, Israel was not there on the ground.
Okay, but they did open fire and people were killed. So I'm completely confused by what you're saying because they admitted, the IDF spokesman said it on our air, that they opened fire.
That's a separate incident.
Okay.
Not connected to the tragedy with the trucks.
She's like, oh, God damn it. She is. I remember doing a segment with her and Nick with Nick about her interviewing somebody else, and she was like, "What? This is basically again like on live on TV." Realizing this is some nonsense propaganda. So right here, she's getting frustrated. Like, this guy is telling bold-faced fucking lies. I just had the IDF come on here and say all of this stuff and admit all of this stuff, and now you're telling me this. So let's rewind and let it play out.
Mass casualties. Israel was not there on the ground.
Okay, but they did open fire and people were killed. So I'm completely confused by what you're saying because they admitted, the IDF spokesman said it on our air, that they opened fire.
That's a separate incident.
Okay.
Not connected to the tragedy with the trucks. That was different place, different time, right, in the general location, right, but not the same incident at all. And I have to tell you that we are not aware that the IDF fired caused casualties at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you that a journalist who CNN works with on the ground has a different view of it, but maybe there were other incidents. That obviously you say is under review, and we will hope to get further clarification. But here's the thing. So Israel is the only force in charge of security by your own announcements, by your own volition, by your own actions over the last 5 months or so there. It is, as everybody is saying, Israel's responsibility, therefore, if you let these trucks in, to provide security. And this obviously comes in the context of so little food going in that people are desperate, as we've heard from the international forces. So first, aren't you the only law enforcement people in the Gaza Strip right now?
Unfortunately, Hamas has not yet been completely destroyed. And I should have
Okay.
been clearer. In the first incident of the truck being swamped by civilians, there was gunfire. But it wasn't Israeli forces. There weren't Israeli forces on the trucks or around the trucks.
So now he's saying there was gunfire in the first incident. Remember, he was trying to say, the gunfire that the IDF soldier is talking about, that was a whole separate incident, different time. Now he's going back to say there was an incident there. You think they're stupid? They're not stupid. It is a sign of we don't have to really think about the lies we're going to tell, because we know our money means you're going to back that shit anyway, United States. So it's a indication that they know they don't have to put that much effort into coming up with these stories. Let's continue.
Strip right now?
Unfortunately, Hamas has not yet been completely destroyed. And I should have
Okay.
been clearer. In the first incident of the truck being swamped by civilians, there was gunfire. But it wasn't Israeli forces. There weren't Israeli forces on the trucks or around the trucks. That was Palestinian armed groups. We don't know if it was Hamas or other armed groups, but there definitely was fire. That we do know.
Okay. So my question again is, Israel is the only law enforcement operation on the ground as you wage this war. Therefore, if you allow these trucks in, who do you expect to provide the security for them? Because every convoy needs security. I mean, I've covered this from, time immemorial, back from Bosnia to Somalia and elsewhere. It all requires discipline, organization, and coordination and security. Who do you think should have been responsible for security in the convoy that you allowed in?
So it's a difficult question, and we're grappling with it, and we're talking to the international community.
What do you mean it's a different question and you're grappling with it? You got to have an answer for the trucks that are coming in. Because the question she's trying, I mean, she could ask the question more linear and forceful and say, if you are the only security forces in Gaza, shouldn't you provide the security for the food? Shouldn't you provide the security for the supplies? That's what she's trying to ask. But let's continue.
To the aid organizations, to the United Nations, to other partners who are relevant in this conversation, because of course we want to see the aid safely reach the people. Now, it's quite possible, as you know, Hamas has been stealing aid. That's been documented. We've heard people in Gaza complain about this. So is it possible that that people in Gaza don't trust that this aid that the international community is giving to the people of Gaza is actually reaching the people of Gaza and not being siphoned off by the terrorists? That could be one of the reasons to explain what's going on.
Discussing anything with a Zionist is just useless. They deal in a different parallel universe, and there's nothing you can do about that with them. But anyway, let's get to some other items here. Where's it at here? Yeah, this is it here. So in talking about the flower massacre, and also mention that with the type of democracy we have here should probably die. We want that democracy to die so we can build something better. The democracy, again, let me just recap, the democracy that suppresses wages, 2024 is still under $8. The democracy that funds a police state but doesn't get better results. The democracy that has rent skyrocketing but not wages. The democracy that has food skyrocketing because of waging foreign wars across the sea. Democracy that should die because of the amount of bombs it's dropping. The democracy that should die ultimately for what we're talking about right now in the Flower Massacre, a democracy that should die because it supports a genocide. And uncommitted, if we remember the uncommitted campaign in Michigan, was essentially a bunch of social democrats that came together and said, hey, let's show our discontentment with their policy position in Israel, in Palestine, and hope that they change it by November, but they're not going to change it. So not only is it not a democracy, not only is it it's a democracy that has all these is dabbling in all this bad shit, but it's a democracy that doesn't even deliver on democracy. The people 80% of the Democrats want a ceasefire. 60% of all people want a ceasefire. That's the majority. Why isn't that happening in a democracy? The majority of people want universal health care. Why isn't that happening in a democracy? The majority of people want a severe boost or a huge boost in the minimum wage. Why isn't that happening in a democracy? So even if you look at it that way, is okay, let's say it's not doing all those bad things. Is the democracy delivering on democratic agendas? No. So again, what are we saving? Let's listen to James Carville talk about the ceasefire protests and how it's a problem. Every time I see this guy, he reminds me of the Beverly Hillbillies, the grandma from the Beverly Hillbillies. Now, I'm a TV sort of nerd, so I know a lot of old shows. I know a bunch of different stuff. So I might be referencing something that a lot of you may not even know. But some of our boomer crowds might know the reference of the grandma from the Beverly Hillbillies. He looks just like James Carville. But let's listen to this clip here.
Well, first of all, the left wing of the Democratic Party has very little power, very little sway over voters. But the stuff in Gaza is a problem, and it's a pretty big problem. There are a lot of people, and particularly a lot of Democrats, that are uncomfortable with it. Certainly not to the point that they would, not vote for President Biden. But I'm gonna tell you, Art, they don't get this stuff somehow or another de-escalated between now and the convention in Chicago. You don't want to imagine what's going to happen there, because all of those cameras are going to draw people from all over the country. You're a little too young to remember this, but I remember the '68 convention, and it was something horrific. And there's real. Well, I studied. Real concern.
I'll let you finish, but I wasn't around, James. I wasn't around, but I studied. I think '68 was where you had anti-war protests, and then you had Mayor Daley, who would talk about an old school type of Democrat, had police busting open a lot of progressives' heads outside the hall. It was bad optics and bad ethics. You're saying what? That's an extreme example. You're saying what for this year's Democratic convention?
I'm saying if the stuff is not de-escalated in Gaza by the time of the Democratic convention, that there's going to be protests and a very emotional in active protest. And I don't know how much further to go on that. I don't know if it's going to be 68. Maybe that's the low water mark or something like that. But if there's real angst in the country, and it's not just the little snot-nosed kids on Ivy League campuses. There's some angst about the way that this war is being executed, and it's hurting President Biden. And he knows that. He's tried to address it on a couple of times. And, Netanyahu needs this war to stay in power. I just have a kind of not very good feeling about where this is going to go if it's still around during the convention. I really don't.
Interesting coming from you, and we know a lot of folks in the Biden White House keep an eye on everything you're thinking and saying. So that's interesting. I want you to hang with me.
I wanted to play all of it before I gave my commentary. There's something in the beginning he says. So let's play it again and give my commentary now.
Well, first of all, the left wing of the Democratic Party has very little power, very little sway over voters.
The left wing of Democratic Party has very little sway. To me, that is speaking to you don't have a backbone. You don't really stand up for your policy beliefs. You just kind of cave. That's what that to me speaks to.
But the stuff in Gaza is a problem, and it's a pretty big problem. There are a lot of people, and particularly a lot of Democrats, that are uncomfortable with it. Certainly not to the point that they would, not vote for President Biden. But I'm gonna tell you, Art, they don't get this stuff somehow or another de-escalated between now and the convention in Chicago. You don't want to imagine what's going.
The convention in Chicago, covered by Hardlands Media, who's based in Chicago. I believe Nick is going to be going down there for Chicago. Some other RBN members I don't want to announce without confirmations. But as James Carville is what James Carville is talking about is true. That convention is going to be on fire with protests. That convention, regardless, you can be a ceasefire now. Like, let's say they stop the hostilities now. I still believe there's going to be protests even then. But I think this is going to be the strategy for the Biden administration. They're going to, in order to trick progressives, in order to give cover to progressives, we're going to call for a ceasefire like in September. Like in August, they'll call for a ceasefire right around the convention time. I think the convention is in August. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But right around that time, late summer months, he probably announces a ceasefire. That way he can say they at least said it. Then TYT and Jank and Anna and Sam Cedar and Emma over at Majority Report and all the other ones, part of the Bernie Sanders industrial complex, will have cover now. Look, he said ceasefire. He said ceasefire. Not to mention at that time, I would imagine in August that the death toll would clearly be above 75,000, including the ones from starvation. Just said.
Going to happen there because all of those cameras are going to draw people from all over the country. You'll go too young to remember this, but I remember the 68 convention, and it was something horrific.
Yeah, so he's referencing the 68 convention, and in 60s was, remember, the war that was going on, Vietnam was going on. So yeah, let's continue. Now this is an article, maybe we'll come back to it in a little bit, but this is an article from, of course, antiwar.com. Israeli troops kill over 100 Palestinians seeking food in Gaza City. Oops. Hang on a second here, guys. Something popped up on another screen. Maybe I'll toss it up here. Yeah, I'll toss it up just for a second here. I'll toss up that article. Just for a second here. Here it is. This is from the MiddleEastEye.net. War on Gaza. Israeli massacre kills over 100 Palestinians seeking food in Gaza. Let's read a little bit of the article. At least 104 Palestinians were killed and 100 more wounded when Israeli forces fired on people at an aid convoy in Gaza City, Al-Rashid. I knew a person named Rashid, spelled the same way. Al-Rashid Street on Thursday. The Palestinian Health Ministry said, calling the incident a massacre. Residents of Gaza City had gathered seeking food with the area completely cut off from the aid by Israeli forces. NGOs and UN experts have voiced fears of famine in northern Gaza, and there have been reports of people, including babies, dying of hunger. Fares Afani, head of the ambulance service at Gaza's Kamal Adawan hospital, said medics found dozens or hundreds of bodies lying on the ground once they reached the scene. He said some wounded had to be carried to the hospital on donkey carts as there were not enough ambulances to take all the dead and wounded. And I showed you that in the video. It is just terrible what's happening on the ground. I don't know what other word that could just the highest level of humanity just gone out the window over here in Gaza.